Hey guys, hey, this is our last review, you guys' last review hopefully for my course for the 2 semesters. And before I started, I want to say thanks to all of you that hung in there and took the class the second time, because there are easier options and some of those people are finding easier options to take than me, but you guys hung in there and I greatly appreciate it. Enjoyed your class, and don't be strangers. I'm sure I'll see some of you in the hall in your programs, but give me a shout every once in a while. Let me know how you're doing. So, going back to last week, I think I put a chart on for the endocrine system on Blackboard, so you can find that on there. So I'm not reviewing chapter 13 with you at all. That is your review. It's compacted. It's very user-friendly, and most of you took the lab exam today, and thank you for that. And if not, you probably hadn't missed anything. So I know some of you are probably picking and choosing and saying, I'm skipping this test because I don't have time, and that's fine. Just, you can only miss one. But so I'm going to go through chapter 20, and I'm going to do this fairly quick to keep down the time to upload these, but I'll try to stick with the high points here. All right. Chapter 20, as you know, is the urinary system. You should know this first slide. You should know what the urinary system does, the functions of it. Let's go on here. There's a lot of anatomy in this, so I'm going to skip through the anatomy. You've already been tested on that today. Now, one thing that it's kind of anatomy, but I usually put it on the test. Back in 137, we talked about the serous membranes that line the body, line closed body cavities, like the parietal pleura, the visceral pleura, the parietal peritoneum, the visceral peritoneum. If you remember, the parietal peritoneum lined the abdominopelvic cavity. However, the kidney is kind of an exception. The kidney is actually behind the peritoneum. We call it retro. As you know, retro means behind or in the past. Retroperitoneal is what we call that, and I would like you to know that. You can see the parietal peritoneum kind of saran wraps the kidney to the back part of the body wall. And for years they would cut somebody from belly button to spine to do a kidney transplant, and now they can just make a small incision and just suck it out of there, I think is how they do it. And it's quite easy, but they didn't realize it was behind the peritoneum. So, very neat. Okay, again, anatomy. There's going to be a lot of anatomy here, so I'm going to try to make this short and sweet for you guys. Anatomy, virtual dissections. Sorry, it's not even catching up. So you don't have any of these pictures probably in yours, but all right, functions of the kidney. You should know the functions of the kidney. We talked about the urinary system maintaining the chemical composition of the blood. Well, that's what the kidney does. It removes metabolic waste. That is in the process of urination. But then it also helps control the rate of red blood cell production. That is on your chapter 13, I think, little chart I gave you. Regulate the blood pressure, and you don't have to worry about the calcium ion absorption. All right, again, anatomy. I used to have the students know the blood flow, which is quite complex, into and out of the kidney, but we couldn't hardly find a source that had it correct. So we discontinued it. I'm going to try to make this short and sweet for you. And again, I want to say there's 42 questions on this test. So it's not the normal size, and you saw that with your lab. There were only, maybe 33 questions on there. That's why it was such a short time frame. Remember, the nephron unit is the primary, the functional unit of the kidney, the nephron. We talked about the parts there. Again, if there's a question that I don't go over, I give that to you. Again, no blood supply. All right, urine formation. This is the primary crux of this chapter, or a big part of it. We have 3 processes: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. And I'm going to make this as short and sweet as I can, which normally I don't, but I don't like that. Okay, we'll start here. Glomerular filtration. Remember, the glomerulus or glomerular capillaries, we have an afferent arteriole coming in and efferent going out. That is bringing the blood to thousands of these nephron units, which is where we're going to carry on these three processes. So the afferent coming in, once it gets into the glomerular capillaries, it is filtered. And you may not remember this, but in chapter 15, I mentioned about capillaries. We were still at the school at this point, and I said that some of them have slits in them called fenestrations or fenestra. These are fenestrated capillaries. You can see it on this slide. They call them fenestra. So not only is this one layer of simple squamous epithelium, if you remember from last semester, in the capillaries, it also has holes in it, so it allows things to be filtered out of the blood. So that filtration is when it just comes out of the glomerulus into the capsule. That's completes filtration. That's the first step. Disregard that chart. Now, the reason it does this, and you don't have to know these numbers, is that there's more pressure pushing out of the capillary than there is resisting it. And we've talked about that in other scenarios like respiration, etc. So you have a net pressure pushing out, is all that's saying. Now this is a pretty neat slide, but I can't forget something. Glomerular filtration rate is how fast are you filtering things out of the kidney, essentially. And your book does not even give you that, or your notes. It is 125 milliliters per minute. Milliliters per minute, 125 milliliters per minute. Now, in an average 24-hour day, you have 180 liters of glomerular filtrate. That means, stack up 92-liter bottles, and that's how much blood you are filtering in a day. That is amazing that the kidneys do that. And out of that, you only urinate 1/2 to 2.5 liters. So out of those 92-liter bottles, you might get 1 2-liter bottle of urine throughout a 24-hour day. That's pretty crazy. But that also tells you what happens in our next, that we reabsorb most of what we filter because we need it. And we'll talk about that in a minute, including the water, etc. Now, how do we control the rate of filtration? It's done through autoregulation, your notes will say, and that is the parasympathetic nervous system. If you remember back from last semester, the parasympathetic nervous system is controlled with homeostasis. In other words, the sympathetic or fight or flight, if I'm running from a lion, do I need to pee? No, you're going to get eaten. So the parasympathetic takes place, or takes that function over. And if you remember, I gave you an acronym, SLUD, SLUD, salivation, lacrimation, urination, defecation. Those were all functions of the parasympathetic nervous system. That is autoregulation. We can also control it by increasing the sympathetic input. If we give more sympathetic input to the kidney, it's going to decrease your glomerular filtration rate because you're running from a lion, so to speak. The Renin-Angiotensin System, let's just say this. I'll define that on the next slide or in a couple slides, but the kidney monitors your blood pressure. And it has what we call baroreceptors. Barometric pressure you probably have heard of that before. A barometer measures barometric pressure. Well, baroreceptors in the kidney measure blood pressure. When blood pressure goes down, the kidney will release a hormone called renin. This is actually, I think, on your little chart for chapter 13, I think I put that in there. But I didn't explain it. I just said the Renin-Angiotensin System. I'll explain it in a minute, what happens with that. And also the heart itself releases something called atrial natriuretic peptide, which will increase GFR. If you increase the rate of filtration, you are generally going to decrease the blood pressure somewhat. So the heart is helping itself out. All right, now here's the Renin-Angiotensin System. I don't even know why they have the liver here, but don't pay attention to the liver in this. We're not going to use the liver. But the kidney monitors your blood pressure. When blood pressure is low, it releases the hormone renin. The hormone renin is going to cause the conversion of something called angiotensinogen, which is produced by the liver. You don't need to know that. But it converts angiotensinogen to something called angiotensin 1. That conversion has to be made. We convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2 in the lung. And that's governed by another hormone called angiotensin converting enzyme, also known as ACE, ACE for its abbreviation, ACE. So angiotensin 2 by itself is a major vasoconstrictor, meaning it's going to constrict the blood vessels, which means you have more resistance. We talked about that in chapter 15. More resistance means blood pressure goes up. It's also going to increase aldosterone secretion, and that's on your chart in chapter 13. And aldosterone secretion is from the adrenal cortex, and it's going to cause the reabsorption of sodium from the distal convoluted tubule. And in a minute, I'll tell you why that's significant, because normally we don't reabsorb at the distal convoluted tubule, we reabsorb at the proximal convoluted tubule. But if it's hormone driven, we will. It also increases ADH secretion by the posterior pituitary gland. And if that's also in your chart, chapter 13, the endocrine system. And ADH is antidiuretic hormone, which is going to cause you to do what? Preserve water. It's going to cause reabsorption of water at the distal convoluted tubule. And lastly, it's going to increase your thirst. It's going to make you drink more. All this is going to increase your blood volume. It's going to increase the peripheral resistance, which raises your blood pressure. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. Also, on vasoconstriction, it is a particular interest to the efferent arteriole. It will vasoconstrict it more because the efferent is coming out of the glomerulus. If you constrict the efferent arteriole, your GFR goes up and your blood pressure goes up. Your blood pressure has to go up for the GFR to go up. I said that opposite a while ago. All right, so that's how it does. Trust me, you will like the question for this on the test. And if you miss it, I'm going to drop you out of the course. All right, now let's not get caught up. We started out talking about glomerular filtration. That's the first stage of urine formation. Here is the second, tubular reabsorption. So as soon as we filter that out of the blood and we're in the proximal convoluted tubule, your body reabsorbs most of that. In fact, it says 70%. But what I want you to know primarily for the test is that tubular reabsorption primarily takes place at the proximal convoluted tubule. It's reabsorbing everything: glucose, water, urea, proteins. You can read through your text there, all these ions, because we need them. Very little of this goes into your urine. Urine is waste. Now, I'm not going to go through all these. Here's diffusion, osmosis, facilitated diffusion, co-transport. We talked about those in 137. But what happens, here's your glomerulus, filtrate is coming out, it gets in the proximal convoluted tubule, and then it's reabsorbed right back into the bloodstream, either by simple diffusion, active transport, co-transport, where you have or the attraction of a negative and positive ion going together, osmosis for water. In tubular secretion, I like this analogy, but I don't like the diagram, because this is the proximal convoluted tubule. Remember, you have this tortuous, twisty proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule. Tubular secretion takes place at the distal. So tubular reabsorption, which occurs at the proximal, is going from the tubule back to the bloodstream. Right? Basically, this is the efferent arteriole and the peritubular capillaries. Once we get along in that blood flow, then we go from the bloodstream back into the tubule. But this is very late in the tubule, at the distal convoluted tubule. So secretion, I just don't like their diagram. All right, here it shows you how some of these cross. That's a good read. You can read through that in tubular reabsorption. Here's a good little chart that shows you how much we reabsorb. If you have 180 liters of water being filtered a day, you reabsorb 99% of that back into the body. We don't need to get rid of water. Sodium is even more. If you have 630 grams of sodium, it's going to reabsorb 99.5%, because you need sodium for proper nervous system transmission, for example. So we're reabsorbing almost everything. All right, finally, tubular secretion. Now we have substances coming out of the capillaries back into the tubule. But put it down here. Primarily takes place at the distal convoluted tubule. So again, reabsorption at the proximal convoluted tubule, secretion at the distal. Now I want to make a point here because I just said when we talked about Renin-Angiotensin System that reabsorption of sodium and reabsorption of water happened at the distal convoluted tubule, but it happened because it was hormonally driven by ADH and aldosterone. So ADH for water, aldosterone for sodium. But almost all tubular reabsorption happens at the proximal, tubular secretion at the distal, other than those two. All right, how do we regulate? This is a good read. You can read that, it tells you a little bit about aldosterone, ADH. All right, this diagram here shows a lot with just the colorings here. See how this is light yellow, this is dark yellow. So over here is when we don't have a lot of ADH being secreted. You always secrete certain amounts of ADH, antidiuretic hormone, because you want to reabsorb a lot of your water. If you don't, you can have a condition called diabetes insipidus, and you will pee constantly. Huge volumes of urine because you are not reabsorbing the water. So we're always secreting it. But when you have a lot, say you're not dehydrated, say you're a big time water drinker, for example, you will not need to secrete a lot of ADH because you're not deficient in water. So your urine will be clear and more dilute. It will lack a lot of like the waste products. You'll have more water compared to waste. So it'll be light colored urine, it won't stink, versus if you're in need of water, your body's going to secrete more ADH to preserve more water because you're dehydrated. Your urine will be more full of the waste and it will be dark, it will be much less, and it will stink usually. So that's why you should, we talked about fecal matter and digestive system. You should always look at your toilet when you pee too, just to see what your pee looks like and tell whether you should be drinking more or less water. That's a good table to read, tells you about ADH. All right, let's see what else we got. There's not much else here I'm going to give you. Urine composition is mostly water. Sorry, I'm going backwards here. Mostly water. All right, here's something I want you to know. The elimination of urine. Now, I can't write all this down on a whiteboard. Our whiteboard had too much of a glare on it. We tried to use it earlier. So just listen to this. We start in the renal corpuscle. Now, I'll either start with renal corpuscle, or you could say I'm at the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule. Remember, the corpuscle is the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule combined. So I'll either start at the corpuscle, Bowman's capsule, or the glomerulus. Then it goes to the proximal convoluted tubule. Then it goes through the loop of Henle. This is urine, the path of urine. So proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule. Then it goes to the collecting duct. Collecting ducts go down, and then you can kind of follow this. It goes to the minor calyx, major calyx, then to the renal pelvis, then to the ureters rather, then to the urinary bladder, then the urethra, and then out to the world. Well, I want you to know that elimination of urine starting at the corpuscle and or the glomerulus, whichever I would choose to say. All right. Ureters, I don't care that you know the anatomy of the ureters. What I want you to know is the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra all contain, this is from last semester, what type of epithelium? Okay, I'm hearing crickets, right? Which I would hear in class. Transitional. Remember, it stretches. Now, something else I'd like you to know for the test, and usually I will get on the ladies in the class and then kind of give them a thumbs up. Us guys, we only care about getting somewhere in record time. But if there's a lady in the car, she's always going to mess that up. Why? Because they got to go to the bathroom. My wife's filming this, so she's probably getting a kick out of it. She has to go to the bathroom twice before we even leave the house, and then has to go to the bathroom twice when we go somewhere. but you have a reason. The male bladder sits here unobstructed by anything. The female bladder has something sitting on top of it called a uterus, and if you are pregnant, you have something else sitting on top of it. That's why you can't hold your bladder. So just know that, and know that a pregnant female would have to urinate much more than a non-pregnant female. And we call urination, it's in a couple slides here. Couple slides. I'm skipping this. You don't need any of this. Again, urethra has transitional. But the female that is pregnant would have to micturate more often than one that is not. Micturition is the process of urination, of urine leaving the bladder. And I think that's about it on the review. Again, I'm not reviewing chapter 13 because I put that chart on Blackboard. You will have information off that chart. There'll be some matching on this. I think it's about 42 questions if I'm not mistaken. So not as big as the normal exam. I wish you guys luck. I thank you for staying in the class and staying the course and staying on this online craziness, and hope to God we'll be back with this virus thing. I'm ready to go back to work and go back to what we're normally doing. So again, thanks. Don't be a stranger and get that exam taken. I think it's on the 7th, if I'm not, but you have an online schedule. So we'll see you later. Thank you.